By the end of this video, the parts of the TOEFL IBT listening section exam that confuse everyone are going to make complete sense. That's the deal. We're going to strip away the academic fluff and look at how these conversations are actually built. Quote, I'll walk you through the nuances of campus dynamics and the specific way professors hide their main points in complex lectures. We're covering everything from tone shifts to inference traps. Let's get to work. Most people treat the listening section like a memory test. It isn't. It's a logic test hidden inside an audio file. If you're trying to transcribe every word, you've already lost the gang. I'm going to show you what to actually listen for so you can stop guessing. Okay, let's start with the conversations you'll hear in a registrar's office or a professor's lounge. These aren't just random chats, they have a very specific structure. Right, quick note. Imagine a student walks into the housing office and starts complaining about a noisy radiator. You might think the main topic is maintenance, but halfway through they ask if they can move to a different dorm entirely. The radiator was just the hook. The exam loves to test if you caught that shift. Wrong answers often focus on the opening complaint because it's fresh in your mind. What I see students do is get so hyper-focused on the first 30 seconds that they miss the actual request. The thing nobody tells you is that the first thing said is rarely the most important thing. A professor might say, it would be great if you could look over the syllabus again before our next meeting. They aren't making a suggestion, they're giving an assignment. In a real-world academic setting, authority figures often use soft language to deliver hard requirements. The test will ask what the professor implies, and if you take the words literally, you'll miss the command. Students often pick the polite suggestion answer because they're being too literal. Just remember, if a professor suggests something in a TOEFL audio clip, it's usually a requirement. Got that? It's a subtle distinction, but it's where the points are. Listen for that moment when a student goes, oh, I hadn't thought of that. That's not just filler. That's a marker that their perspective has changed. If the question asks about the student's attitude toward a policy and you only listen to their initial anger, you're going to get it wrong. You have to track the arc of the conversation. Why is the wrong answer tempting? Because it reflects the student's most emotional state, which is usually at the beginning. If you can identify the exact moment the student's mind changes, you're in better shape than you think. That's a high-level skill. Now, here's the thing about the lectures. They aren't just lists of facts, they're organized around a specific rhetorical goal. Let's break down how to see the skeleton behind the words. A professor spends 5 minutes talking about a specific species of blue butterfly in the Amazon. Is the lecture about butterflies? Probably not. It's likely about ecosystem fragilities or mimicry. The butterfly is just a tool. The trap is picking an answer that focuses on the colorful details of the insect rather than the scientific principle it illustrates. Always ask yourself, why is he telling me this specific story right now? If you remember nothing else from this section, remember THIS. The details are there to serve the concept, not to be the concept themselves. Sometimes a professor will go on a tangent about their own college days or a funny mistake they made in the lab. It sounds human, but on the TOEFL, it's often a test of your ability to filter noise. These digressions are rarely the answer to a main idea question. Actually, let me back up. Sometimes a digression is the subject of a function question, like why does the professor mention his old roommate? But it's never the main point. Don't let a funny 2-sentence story distract you from the 20-minute theory. Stay with me here, because this is where people lose their place in the notes. Right, quick note. If you hear a professor say, now, unlike the Roman architectural style, the Greeks, you should immediately draw a line down the middle of your note paper. They're setting up a comparison. The exam loves to swap the characteristics of the two things to see if you were paying attention. It's a classic trap. They'll give you a Greek characteristic and attribute it to a Roman building in the answer choices. The thing nobody tells you is that you don't need to know what Dorics or Ionics means, you just need to know which one is being contrasted with the other. Right, quick reset. Focus on the difference markers. Right, stay with me. We're moving into the what do they actually mean territory. This is the hardest part for most students because it requires reading between the lines. Now here's the thing. Suppose a student proposes a wild theory and the professor responds with, well, that's certainly an interesting way to look at it. In TOEFL speak, interesting often means wrong or unsupported. If you pick an answer saying the professor encouraged the student, you've missed the sarcasm or the professional skepticism. Why is the wrong answer tempting? Because interesting sounds positive in a dictionary. But in a lecture hall, it's often a polite way to move on from a bad idea. Look for the follow-up. Does the professor immediately change the subject? If so, they didn't like the idea. Right, quick note. If a student says they can't find a specific source in the library and the professor mentions a special collections room, what will the student likely do next? They aren't going to go home. They're going to that room. These what will happen next questions are common sense tests wrapped in academic jargon. Don't overthink it. The answer is always the most logical, direct solution to the problem just discussed. What I see students do is look for a complex, hidden meaning when the answer is literally just, the student will follow the advice they just received. A sharp intake of breath, a long or a word like actually are all massive red flags. These markers signal that a correction is coming. If a professor says most people think X, actually it's Y, the question will almost certainly be about Y. The wrong answer will be X because it was the first thing you heard. Use these markers as your pay attention now cues. If you can catch the actually or the however, you're ahead of 80% of other test takers. It's about being an active listener, not a passive one. Okay, now let's talk about the data. Lectures are full of numbers, names, and dates. Here's how you handle the information overload. Professor might list 4 different years and 3 different percentages regarding the Industrial Revolution. You don't need to memorize the numbers. You need to know the trend. So the bride, was the growth fast or slow? Was the date before or after the war? The exam almost never asks for a specific number unless that number is tied to a major conceptual shift. If you're scribbling down 18.4% while the professor is explaining why the growth happened, you're missing the point. Focus on the more than or less than aspect, not the digits themselves. Okay? Yeah. The professor uses a big word like photosynthesis or epistemology. Then they define it using simpler words. The question will use the simpler words in the answer choice to see if you understood the big word. Or, even nastier, the wrong answer will use the big word incorrectly. Don't pick an answer just because it sounds academics or uses the same jargon from the lecture. Pick the one that accurately describes the meaning. This is a common trap warning. The TOEFL uses high-level vocabulary in wrong answers to trick students who didn't follow the logic. Be smarter than the jargon. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes you'll see a picture of a rock or a diagram of a cell on your screen. The professor will say, as you can see here, this is a gift. It tells you exactly what the next 60 seconds of audio will be about. If you're lost, look at the screen. The visual is your anchor. What I see students do is ignore the image and keep staring at their notes. Don't do that. The image is a map of the audio. If the image shows 3 parts of a cell, the lecture is about those 3 parts. Simple as that. Right, quick reset. Let's talk about the actual physical act of taking notes. If you're writing in full sentences, you're failing. So, watch this. When a professor says consequently or as a result, just draw an arrow. If they say increase, draw an up arrow. Your brain processes images faster than words. If you're trying to spell consequently while the professor has already moved on to the next 3 points, you're creating a backlog in your head. The thing nobody tells you is that your notes don't have to be pretty. They just have to be a shorthand code that only you understand. Use verses for contrast, for uncertainty, and for the main point. Efficiency is everything. So, watch this. Every lecture has signposts. These are phrases like, now let's move on to, or another factor is, every time you hear one of these, Draw a horizontal line across your notes. This physically separates the topics. When a question asks about the second theory, you can look exactly at the second section of your paper. Without these lines, your notes are just a wall of text. By the way, if you're already doing this, you're in better shape than you think. Most students just write in one long, confusing column. Okay? When the audio stops and the question appears, don't just stare at the screen. Spend exactly 5 seconds scanning your notes for the keywords in the question. Your notes are a backup for your memory, not a replacement. Use them to confirm what you already suspect. If the question mentions carbon dating and you see C14 circled in your notes, you have immediate confidence. Actually, let me back up. Don't rely on notes for every single question. Use them for the specific details, but trust your gut on the main idea questions. Okay, let's bring it home. This is about how you handle the pressure when the clock is ticking. Strategy is just as important as listening skill. Here's the exam day version. Sometimes you look at the 4 choices and 2 of them will look 90% correct. This is where students panic. Look for the qualifier. Does one answer say always while the other says often? In the TOEFL, extreme words like always, never, or all are usually wrong. The academic world is full of nuance and maybe. Pick the answer that sounds more cautious and balanced. Why is the wrong answer tempting? Because it's bolder and sounds more definitive. But the correct answer is the one that fits the evidence without overstepping. It happens to everyone. You zone out for 10 seconds or someone coughs and you miss a key point. Don't, I repeat, don't spend the next 2 minutes worrying about what you missed. If you do, you'll miss the next 3 points too. Just draw a question mark in your notes and re-engage immediately. The test is designed with redundancy. Often the professor will repeat the main point in a different way, or a student will ask a question that clarifies it. Stay in the moment. If you can move past a mistake without spiraling, you're ahead of the curve. Now, here's the thing. If you have no idea what the answer is, stop looking for the right one. Start looking for the obviously wrong ones. Is there an answer that discusses a topic not mentioned at all? Cross it out. Is there an answer that contradicts the professor's tone? Cross it out. Even if you can only eliminate 2 choices, you've turned a 25% guess into a 50% coin flip. What I see students do is stare at the screen waiting for the right answer to glow. It won't. You have to hunt for the errors. This is the logic of elimination, and it's your best friend when things get tough. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the bait and switch of campus conversations to the trend of a numbers approach in lectures. Remember, this section isn't about how much you can hear, it's about how much you can filter. You're looking for the logic, the transitions, and the intent behind the words. If you can do that, the questions start to answer themselves. Use your symbols, watch for the actually moments, and never get hung up on a single missed detail. Right now, before you click anything else, go to fluentmock.com and try 5 free TOEFL listening section exam practice questions. 5. That's the challenge. Then come back and let me know how it went. Like, subscribe, see you in the next one. Go put these strategies to the test while they're fresh.